Hey booktubers, Andy from Estella's Revenge here, and I've been thinking a little bit about how to do reviews because I have a written blog that is much busier, much better established than my YouTube channel. I mean, I've pretty much hit the ground running with the YouTube channel, but the blog has been there for 8 years. So I'm trying to integrate both written reviews and video companion pieces to those reviews, or just video versions of those reviews. So there will be some carryover from time to time, probably most of the time, between the video review and the written review. So pick your poison, whichever format you like best. I will always have these video reviews here at YouTube, and they will also be posted along with my written reviews on Blogger. Without further ado, I know I've already bored you. I finished a fantastic foodie nonfiction book this week, and I mentioned this book in my previous video about my Nook HD tablet that I splurged on this week. So this is the Whole Fromage by Kathe Lison. I have nothing when it comes to the French language. Dee Dee over at Frenchy D is like, what did she just say? I took Spanish in high school, so you'll have to forgive me. The extent of my knowledge of the French language was an episode of I Love Lucy where she learned to say pencil, table, and pen. And then one of my favorite movies ever is Amelie. So I can also say stratagème, and I think it's the most beautiful word ever, but only when it comes from Audrey Tautou. So pardon me. Back on track. The Whole Fromage was a really great nonfiction foodie book, and I am a big fan of the foodie books, of the foodie nonfiction. It's been a little while since I read one that dealt with a particular kind of food. I think the last one was Paris, My Sweet, and the author's name eludes me. And I don't even pick nonfiction books about France in particular, but France has such great food, there tends to be a crossover there. So the Whole Fromage was fun. I felt like I was at a little bit of a loss when it came to a discussion of French geography and French topography, mountain ranges and things like that, because I'm absolutely clueless. So I did consult a map from time to time, though I'm quite lazy and was often in places where that wasn't really doable. So yeah, even if you don't know much about the French language and you don't know much about the country itself or the layout of the country, this is still an enjoyable book. It goes through and examines several of the hallmark types of French cheese. So you have some discussion of brie, you have some discussion of camembert, you have Roquefort, and there were several other kinds that I'd never heard of. And so now I'm really excited to keep an eye out and see if I can find them, or at least an Americanized version of them, just because I want to try. A quick story. The first time I ever tried camembert cheese was in my early 20s. I was a graduate student, and my friends and I came up with this brilliant idea on Sunday mornings to have breakfast together. And this turned into the Heathen Brunch Club. It's horrible, horrible if you are religious, but we were really more concerned with drinking at that point. And so we would meet on Sunday mornings at a friend's house who was near the university, and we would have smoked salmon and, you know, mimosas and camembert cheese, apparently. We had all those things, and they were wonderfully indulgent, and it was a lot of fun. So this book took me back there in part as well. But the best part of this book, truthfully, was in the cheese making process. I remember when I was a kid, I don't know if it was on Reading Rainbow or if it was on Mr. Rogers, but one of those shows that I watched as a kid, super young, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, they had a video of the cheese making process and how, you know, the milk is dumped into these huge tubs and it forms curd, and it has to be cut up, and the whey has to be drained off, and it has to be put into molds and aged and all of that stuff. And I was totally taken with that process because I could not believe that the cheese I was eating had been through anything like that. And so to go into really some deep detail about the cheese making process and the types of bacteria that are formed and the aging process and how that's done differently to different types of milk over different time periods in different conditions, and how that makes unique cheeses. Fascinating. Totally fascinating. And a pretty big dose of science too, which I thought was a lot of fun. As you would expect with French food and French cheese, there's a lot of history to be learned about the various regions and about artisanal cheesemakers and about how France has experienced something of an industrial revolution when it comes to cheese and when it comes to food. And there is a thing called an AOC, which I cannot pronounce in French, but if you look at my written review on my blog, there's a blurb from Wikipedia about what that means. But it's essentially the French government saying, if you want to tag your cheese Roquefort, it has to be made under specific conditions. It has to be made with specific types of milk or with specific types of bacteria to create the mold, and so on and so forth. And so that's great because it protects the quality of French cheese. But it can also add to the industrialization of the process, which can drive out some of those artisanal makers, which is a shame in itself. So this book was great. I learned a ton. I learned about some of the fighting and the cheese wars that have gone on over the years in France to protect the product and make it the best that it can be, kind of the give and take between the government and the cheese makers. And, you know, even more, the further back the history went about how the cheese was made and processed and who stumbled upon it and how they refined it and things like that. Super amazing. Just unbelievable. Blew my mind. A totally new experience. Something new that I was not familiar with. So this is definitely one of the best nonfiction books I've picked up in a while. Definitely one of the best foodie nonfiction books that I've ever read. And it's relatively short, at about 199 digital Nook pages. I'm not quite sure what the physical length will be because this book comes out on June 25th. So we have a few days to go. So I hope that you will take some time to check out The Whole Fromage by Kathe Lison, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.